After the deadly attack that took place last Saturday morning, Israel has vowed to wipe off Hamas. In order to achieve this goal, it has ordered for the Gazans to move south of Wadi Gaza. It had given a 24-hour ultimatum to the civilians, and now it has added 6 more hours that the Gazan people can in fact use to try and escape towards the south. A mass exodus is underway in Gaza as we speak. But as the deadline looms over the Gaza city, Israel's relentless air campaign has continued without slowing down at all. The Americans have been pumping more and more weapons into the Israeli hands, which the Israelis are then using to drop on the people in Gaza. Israel's military has repeatedly called that the people of Gaza should leave immediately. And this is what the scene looks like. Miles of Palestinian people in their cars desperately trying to flee from this mind-numbing violence that has in fact gripped this tiny patch of land. People, young and old, and infants and young mothers, young parents, all of them have bundled up whatever they can and they're fleeing, and many of them are in fact fleeing on foot. This is a scene that is reminiscent of what happened 7 decades ago. People thought that they had lived through it, that their worst nightmare was over, but their worst nightmare has come to revisit them again. Israel says that it has kept 2 routes open for the people to flee. At the same time, it has carried out a few localized raids in the northern part of the Gaza Strip.
אנחנו הולמים באויבינו בעוצמה חסרת תקדים. אני מדגיש, זאת רק ההתחלה. אויבינו רק התחילו לשלם את המחיר. ואני לא אפרט מה שיבוא בהמשך. אבל אני אומר לכם, זאת רק ההתחלה.
An impossible window has been given to the people, the Palestinians, 6 hours to pack up whatever they can. Many of them are leaving with just the clothes on their back. Remember, this is about 1 million people who are being asked to get out of their homes. The last time of the first Nakba, it was about 700 to 800,000 Palestinians who had been uprooted, and now it is more than 1 million who are being asked to leave their homes and get out from the northern part of Gaza. Chaos has gripped the region, and after the 24-hour deadline, the Israeli warplanes have been bombing residential areas, especially during the night time, hitting several homes. As Gazans flee towards the south, leaving behind their lives, they're still being hit by Israeli strikes. The Gaza Strip is already one of the most crowded areas in the world. Evacuation means that people are being forced to shelter with relatives and friends in schools or in hastily rented apartments. Over 130,000 Palestinians have been displaced. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency says that 200,000 Palestinians will take refuge in the United Nations schools.
إبادة جماعية، هذا مش حرب، هذه إبادة جماعية، محاولة تهجير كل سكان قطاع غزة إلى خارج القطاع، وهذا أمر لا يمكن أن يحصل.
The Gazans are facing another crisis on the ground. It is Hamas which controls the region, and their diktat is pretty simple: stay put, do not leave. The Palestinian militant group has vowed to fight until the last drop of blood. The Gaza City mosques have been blaring calls telling people to hold on to their homes, to hold to their land, but many who are left with no food and no water and no electricity have begun moving towards the south, and they're doing this on foot.
البيوت مليانه نازحين، اقل بيت فيه 50 و60 نازح، اطفال ونساء، وانت عارف يعني حرب، الكل بيت جاء لمنطقه امنه، قاعدين في بيوتنا. ما بنفضل غير 4 بيوت انهدموا. نزلت برميل، صواريخ امريكيه، بريطانيه، فرنسيه، مش معروف ايش اللي صار في المنطقه، اباده جماعيه.
The Israeli army and reservists have already amassed near the Gaza border. Tanks and other heavy armored weapons have been deployed. The next stage of the operation could involve moving inside of the Gaza Strip. The IDF says that Hamas militants are hiding in the dense network of tunnels beneath the buildings. But this ground incursion, remember, will come at a huge cost, at the cost of homes, at the cost of people's lives. And Israel says that the order to leave is temporary and just a humanitarian gesture. But the people of Gaza say that there is nothing that Israel has ever spoken about, or no agreement that Israel has in fact lived up to, and every agreement that it has said has always turned out to be false. But Jordan says that Israeli move could push the region into the abyss of a wider regional conflict. Egypt has also warned against displacing civilians in Gaza. Turkey says that the call for the Gazans to move is just inhuman. The Western world has been rallying behind the state of Israel while recognizing and calling for an end to the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in the region. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is likely to happen at this moment, we're being joined in by Mr. Edward P. Joseph, who is a political analyst and also a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He's joining us live from New York. Now, Mr. Joseph, this is a critical moment in this conflict. We see that nearly about 360,000 soldiers and reservists have been mobilized by the state of Israel at this moment. We do not know as to when the ground incursion will happen, but it is expected to happen pretty soon. You know, how long drawn do you think this ground incursion could actually be?
That's something that I cannot answer. I know a few people who could answer that question, but what I can answer is how we see the strategy of Hamas playing out, and we see it playing out here in your report, because your report barely mentioned the fact that Hamas launched this war. Let's repeat that for your viewers. Hamas started this war with a deliberate, brutal attack, barbaric attack, really, that has taken the lives of 1,200 Israelis, including over 250 young people at a concert. There have been reports of women being paraded around who had been raped, babies being shot. These are startling, horrifying atrocities that have shaken the conscience of all, not just the Western world, but all civilized people, all people who are concerned about civilian casualties. So we really need to put that into mind here. And we really need to understand that if our concern, as it should be, is not just with Israeli civilians, but also with Palestinian civilians, then our reporting, including this, has to be focused on Hamas and its strategy. And its strategy is exactly as your report explained. It was to deliberately, barbarically attack the Israelis to produce a counter-reaction. So you have to ask the question, Mohammed. This is the question you should be asking.
That's absolutely correct, Mr. Joseph. In the course of the last 7 days, Mr. Joseph, if I can just interject there, in the course of the last 8 days that we've been covering this conflict, we've been talking about what Hamas has done. We've said that it is reprehensible. As you pointed out, that any person who is civilized is not going to condone what Hamas has done. That is absolutely true. No one supports it. No civilized person in the right frame of mind would support it. But also what is happening at this moment is a humanitarian catastrophe that is playing out in the Gaza Strip. There are 2.3 million people for whom food, water, electricity and power has been cut off from. There are hospitals where power has run out. We're talking about a catastrophe that we've not witnessed in a very long time. And it is important that nations which are in positions of power deal with this responsibly. Now, the question that I would want to ask you is, the United States of America, let me just complete my question here. The United States of America, which is the nation that has the largest amount of leverage with the state of Israel at this moment, do you think the United States is doing the right thing? It is important to go after Hamas, but it's also important to ensure that there is no collateral damage.
Let me respond to that, Mohammed. The United States of President Biden is our elected leader, president of the United States, and he has stated very clearly that Israel is required to abide by international law, and it is. The question here is twofold, is what is international law when applied to a place like Gaza under the rule of Hamas? And Mohammed, we have to ask, is Hamas abiding by international law? Or is the deliberate strategy of Hamas, an organization, you have to ask yourself, this, Mohammed, if they would kill Israeli babies, do they really care? Does Hamas care about Palestinian civilians? If they will kill babies, young people at a concert, do they really care? Or do they want deliberately to mount the Israeli, the Palestinian suffering? Now, let's turn to this. President Biden stated, and he is absolutely right, that Israel has to abide by international law. Now, international law, you're guided by the question of proportionality. The thing is, you can turn to experts. There's an expert even at Columbia University who says very clearly that that the question of proportionality can be debated because it depends on the value of the military target. Now, sieges, this is very problematic, but ask yourself, Mohammed, you say it's so terrible to ask the civilians to move. They're not, this isn't Nakba. Why do you invoke inflammatory term? Egypt
this is not me invoking it. Mr. Joseph, let me just interject there. This is not me invoking it. This is what... I'll let you finish, but I think you're making an important point there, Mr. Joseph.
Let me just correct.
Now, the people who are saying that this is reminiscent of a Nakba is not me. I'm sitting here in the studio. What I'm saying is people in the Gaza Strip, people in the Gaza Strip are saying that this is reminiscent of what their grandparents in fact went through.
We're not going to achieve our goal of trying to minimize the suffering of innocent civilians if we distort and simply reflect Hamas claims, which is part of its strategy to heighten Palestinian suffering. The worse, the better for Hamas. I repeat, the worse, the better. The worse the situation for Palestinian civilians, the better it is for Hamas and its strategy. And we won't get there if we just simply parrot things about Nakba. The border is closed. Palestinians cannot go into Egypt. President Sisi has made it that clear. So where's the Nakba? The aim is to minimize civilian casualties by moving them out of the threat, the area where there's a threat. Now, the other thing is you said this high number of Israeli ground forces. Ground forces, I don't know why you would be concerned about that. The greater the number of ground forces, the lower the number of airstrikes. Ground forces minimize civilian casualties, but of course they have to accept civilian casualties. Israelis have to accept higher Israeli civilian or military casualties, but there would be lower Palestinian casualties when you use ground forces as opposed to aerial bombardment.
You've made their point there, Mr. Joseph. We are completely running out of time.
Let's not play into Hamas's goal of increasing
very quickly,
Palestinian
last 20
casualties.
seconds.
Thank you. Please.
All right. I think you've made your point, but I just want to reiterate what Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, told the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu when he said that it is important for democracies to hold themselves to a higher standard than to these non-state militant factions in the way in which they conduct themselves. I think that's an important point that we can all agree upon. Thank you very much.
I agree.
Mr. Edward P. Joseph, for joining us and getting
Thank you.
insights.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.